Oh my god. Son, there's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light. My father used to tell me when he found me screaming in my bed. Though, I am sure his words were meant to comfort me. My young mind understood a more disturbing implication. My dad wanted me to think that I was as safe in the dark as I was in the light. But it sounded as though I was as vulnerable in the light as I was in the dark. I knew there were monsters in my room, and it terrified me to realize that I could not cast them away with the power of my lamp or the flashlight I kept under my pillow. Turning on the light only meant being able to see the creature that lurked in the darkness, and that seemed far more horrific. Every night, I trembled in my bed, dreading the day when the monsters would finally decide to turn me into just some midnight snack. One night, when I was 7, I was woken up by the sound of a phone ringing. I crawled out of bed to eavesdrop on my dad. There was an emergency at work, and he needed to leave urgently. He called my babysitter, who was used to his late night requests and already knew where to find the spare key. I walked to my window and peered outside in time to catch Dad jumping into his van and driving off. His headlights momentarily blinded me and stripped away what little night vision I had garnered up until then. As I turned towards my bed, I spotted something standing on the other side. I nearly peed myself. Squinting to get a better look, I found that my vision was hindered by a collection of fading bright spots still pulsating in my retinas. "Who's there?" I asked in a pathetic whimper. I reached for my lamp, but became paralyzed with fear, remembering my father's words. There's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light. It would be pointless to turn on the light. The figure swayed back and forth silently, in an almost hypnotic rhythm. I remember hearing it hissing and making a strange dripping sound. As a row of cars passed in the street, light poured in through my windows. I started to make out the creature's details. Its arms were twisted and bony. Its hands were a trio of clawed fingers that reminded me of a bird's talons. It had 3 spikes jutting out of each side of its bald head. Its eyes glowed like those of a cat in the night, and it wore a loose robe that, as far as I could tell, was made up of light leather with strands of hair attached to it. I had watched enough cowboy and Indian movies to know what a scalp was when I saw one. I wanted to scream and run, but I couldn't move. Strangely, the creature did not approach me. Instead, it lurked over my empty bed. Pure luck had bunched the blankets up in such a way as to make it seem like I was still under them. Even as the light faded away, I could see one of my monster's talons slowly reaching towards my blanket. It gripped onto the top and pulled it back, revealing the empty bed. The demonic being stretched its abnormally long neck, peering at the spot where I should have been. It made a series of eerie clicking sounds, just like when you smack your tongue against your palate. When it realized that the bed was empty, it emitted a shrill shriek so loud that I had to cover my ears. I remember that sound so vividly, even to this day. It was like a police siren, but 10 times louder and somehow more offensive. Lights, once again, erupted through my window as my babysitter came up the driveway. Her headlights enabled me to see each and every unsettling detail on the creature's horrific face. I could see its sunken golden eyes, its nostrils sitting in the middle of its noseless face, and its eerie, tiny mouth. The mouth formed a perfect circle about the size of the cap on a water bottle and was lined with tiny sharp fangs. Some sort of blackish ooze drizzled out of its lipless maw and landed on the bed, soaking into my Ninja Turtles comforter. For some reason, that mouth terrified me more than anything in my life. Just when I thought I could not feel more frightened, it turned its angry head towards me. Its long neck stretched out in my direction, and I thought I was a goner. Fred Wilkins, 162 Veneer Lane. He'll be much yummier, I told it desperately, selling out the jerk that bullied me to save my own skin. The creature retracted suddenly and melted between the floorboards. I'm not sure whether it accepted my offering or the sound of my front door opening spooked it, but it was gone. I ran out of my room, crying my eyes out. I couldn't tell my babysitter what had happened, but she thankfully understood how frightened I was and let me sleep in the living room while she watched infomercials on TV. Fred was missing from school the next day, and we were told a few days later that his family up and moved overnight. To this day, I do not know whether that was true or whether it was some sort of cover-up to keep our class from freaking out. The creature returned to visit me about once a season. Each time, I gave it another address. Sometimes it was the address of someone I knew. Sometimes it would be random, and I would hope for the best. The monster would disappear and leave me alone until its hunger grew again. I started noticing more and more missing children posters when Dad and I went grocery shopping. I felt guilty, but no amount of guilt could win against my fear. Besides, the other kids deserved it, right? If they were so smart, they would have done like me and told the demonic figure to go eat someone else. I tried to reason my guilt away, but in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. The kids on those posters were never coming back. The last time I saw the creature, I was 11 years old. The moon was casting an unsettling amount of light into my room. I could feel the beast lingering over me while I hid under the covers. I could hear its shallow breathing and feel my blanket damping from the black jewel coming out of its mouth. It didn't matter how many times I had seen the monster. I never wanted to fully look at it ever again. I closed my eyes tightly, desperately trying to remember an address to give it. I felt its talons gripping my blanket. I heard it make a familiar clicking sound, and I panicked. My mind was a blur, and I could not come up with the address that I've been rehearsing for weeks, and it's in anticipation of his visit. If you let me live, you can have my kids when I grow up, I blurted out. The creature paused, as though contemplating my offering. I heard its footsteps as it distanced itself from me, and I slowly pulled the covers away from my face. It gave me one last look. Its tiny fangs twitched a couple of times. I could have sworn I saw it nod as it slowly disappeared into the floor. Honey, there's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light, I told my daughter last night when her screams woke me up. My daughter said there were monsters in her room. I assured her that there was no such thing as monsters. There's nothing worse than living in fear. I knew that from experience. I reached for her teddy bear, which was sitting dutifully on the shelf. and handed it to her. Mr. Scuzzles will protect you, I offered calmly. She took the bear and hugged it close as she continued to cry and beg for a nightlight. I refused to get her one. I don't want her to see it when it comes for her. God help me. No one should have to see that thing. The end.
That clock keeps ticking like a metronome, and my thoughts keep telling me to get me home, but my balls keep telling me to let me oh, just let me